Between August 1988 and July 1989, 4 different little girls are disappearing in the Saitama prefecture, and absolutely nobody understands what's going on. Not only that, but the families are being victimized with not only phone calls, but different boxes and letters describing the deaths of the victims, how they're decomposing with teeth, bones, charred up hands, and sometimes entire skeletons. Each of these victims have one person in common: Tsutomu Miyazaki, and this is their story. Hi everybody, this is Ashea Amour, and this is another episode of our true crime tales on this channel. I hope you're having a good day. I hope you're having a good week. I hope you're having a good night or a good morning whenever I decide to post this. So today we're going to be talking about Tsutomu Miyazaki. Now, Tsutomu Miyazaki was born in August 21st, 1962 in Itsukaichi, Tokyo. His family was pretty well off, pretty wealthy. He had 2 other sisters, Setsuko and Haruko. They were both pretty much in the same household. Everything was all fine and dandy. The only thing was Tsutomu's mother had some kind of birth defect where apparently his hands were fused together and he couldn't like move it individually. He had to move his entire forearm to move his hands, which often led him to bullying in elementary school. It got to a point when he was 5 years old, someone really made fun of him, and then he basically hid his hands through the entirety of his life. Like even up to the point when he was older, he never showed his hands, like ever at all. People often describe Tsutomu as quiet, lonely, not really sticking out much. He was kind of in the background. He was very like to himself, very quiet, didn't really want to engage much. When he was home, he was very bashful, very closed off. He didn't really have a great relationship with his parents. His mom and his dad, because they worked so much and they were so into like politics and image and stuff like that, he was left with his grandfather. He was left with his grandfather and a disabled male nanny, which honestly, Tsutomu apparently grew close to the granddaddy and not really so much the nanny. Now his sisters, Setsuko and Haruko, they found him completely repulsive. They didn't really want anything to do with him. They didn't really care for him too much. So it was kind of like a lonely island type thing for Tsutomu. He was very reclusive. He didn't really show a lot of interest into like family affairs. He didn't really engage much with his peers, but that didn't really stop the fact that he was a brilliant kid. There was multiple reports from the teachers that he was really bright. He was very like articulate. He excelled in his classes. There was even like an assignment that they had to do about like when I want to grow up, something like that. And he put in one of his essays, he was like, when I grow up, I want to get a car, I want to go to a restaurant, and I want to like eat curry with the girls, and we're all having a good old time. Now, because he was isolated, he always reverted to diving into manga a lot. Manga is another word for a Japanese comic. If you are like me who wants to go to Japan one day, there is a huge section called Akihabara, which is basically the anime manga district of Tokyo, Japan, and I love it so much. We're not going to veer off way because my hairdresser got me next and I can't have her waiting all day. But yes, Akihabara is like the manga anime utopia, and I want to go so bad. He would kind of dive into his manga a lot, even though he was like fully closed off. He didn't really make too much of a presence in his like classroom. He was intelligent enough to go to Meidai Nakano High School. It was basically one of them schools where like if you rolled it out and you scored high, you can get into Meiji University. So Meiji University is basically like the Yale and the Harvard of the United States. Like it's a big deal. Like you got your doctors, your lawyers, your politicians. A lot of them go to Meiji University, which is a very reputable school. It was all good. He had like he did a 2-hour commute front and back for 3 years, my God. And he was like really excelling into his studies until one point he just stopped caring. Like he stopped caring. He stopped getting involved with his peers. He stopped getting involved into like class activities and stuff. And even when they had to do the entrance or the qualification exam to see if he could go into Meiji University, he scored a 40 out of 56. And because he scored a 40 out of 56, he was deemed unqualified to go into Meiji University, which was a big hit for him apparently because he wanted to be an English teacher. He wanted to be an English teacher. He wanted to teach the girls the vowels and the syllables and the nouns and the pronouns. He wanted to do that. So With him not being able to go to Meiji University, one of the best universities to teach English, it was kind of whatever to him. He didn't really care too much about his education. He didn't really want to continue the family business, which was the newspaper company. He didn't really care too much, and he didn't really like express to his family that he wanted to do that. After he graduated from high school, he went off to become a photo technician. So he became a photo technician, graduated at 21, and then he ended up going back home, and he ended up sharing a 2-room annex with his oldest sister. Now, during this time, the girls at the salon had told me that Tsutomu was getting more and more closed off. He wasn't really talking to his family like that. His daddy didn't really care about him. His mom was like always dismissive about, you know, his life or whatever. And there was even a point where he talked about Tsutomu was really, really depressed. He didn't really have that much support at home. His dad was dismissive. His mom was absent. His sisters ain't want to deal with him. So he was kind of by himself with a lot of stuff. The only person that really gave a damn about Tsutomu was his grandfather. That kind of kept him on the teeter-totter of reality, because he oftentimes said that he felt super alone and felt like nobody would really miss him if he ended his life, you know? Now, with his growing isolationist personality, whatever, he started to further dive into the arts per se. And I'm gonna quote it very hard because you'll understand like later on in the video. So with him being more isolated, he started dabbling more into manga, anime. He started dabbling more into like horror movies, and he even started dabbling into pornography. During the time that he started to dabble into these things, you know, he's like a growing man. Well, let me not say it like that. He's growing up and his urges are coming more forward. And because he didn't really have that experience with women, he didn't really know how to approach a woman, and he kind of relied on his like manga, anime, hentai. He kind of relied on other people's perspective of how to approach a woman and all that different stuff. He even got to the point that he started buying cameras and going to the tennis courts and all of the things and the track meets and the basketball courts and all the different things, and he started taking pictures of women's crotches. Now, he started taking pictures of women's crotches, and he would use these pictures to masturbate. So he would use these pictures to masturbate, and even with all of that, his growing urge to have sex with a woman was still growing, but he didn't really have that experience with a woman, so he just continued doing what he did, which is a lot already. So I'm not sure if a lot of you guys know this, but with Japanese porn, they do blur out or black out the pelvic area of like the adults or whatever. So with all that being said, it was very heavily regulated back in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. So with the porn that Tsutomu was consuming, the porn actually had the pelvic organs blacked out. So you couldn't see no coochie, you couldn't see no balls, you couldn't see no, you know, penis, you couldn't see no nothing. Over time, it's reported that Tsutomu has said he had got bored with it. So with him getting bored with adult pornography, he started to venture into child pornography. Yay, like he started dabbling into child pornography because he said himself that they blacked out the pubic hair, and because children don't have pubic hair, he was able to see what he needed to see. Which, quick disclaimer, this case is literally the case that made me realize that I'm not equipped to do cases where children are the victims, so this is gonna be the last case with children. So yeah, let's continue back to Tsutomu. So Tsutomu started dabbling in child pornography, and he started to collect thousands and thousands of videos and manga and anime. And keep in mind, it's very easy to buy porn in Japan. It's very easy to buy child porn in Japan. It's called Lolita in some places. It's very easy to consume that stuff. It's very easy to dabble in your quote unquote fantasies in Japan. So you could literally, it's as easy as going into a Walgreens and being like, hey, I want this child porn, I want this necrophilia porn, I want this kind of porn, that kind of porn. He started collecting thousands and thousands and thousands of manga, anime, horror movies, and he even started buying a series called Guinea Pig Horror or Guinea Pig Slasher, whatever, where it shows very, very, very gruesome type videos. Like, Japan ain't had no bounds, and they still don't have no bounds. Yeah, all of that was going on in Japan. You could literally go to the Walgreens and buy the kind of porn you want, and everybody was just okay with it, apparently. Tsutomu started collecting his porn, and he started to further dabble into it. Still not really messing with no women or whatever, but that was kind of his niche, his thing for a long time. The main event that the girls at the salon told me was that Tsutomu's grandfather had died back in 1988. And because his grandfather was actually the only thing holding him onto reality, when his grandfather died, he apparently started to spiral. For whatever reason, Tsutomu believed like his grandfather wasn't going to be reincarnated because they cremated him, so his ashes were still technically in this world. So what Tsutomu thought to do was to eat his grandfather's ashes so he had a chance to be reincarnated. And after that, he got even more violent. There's another story where he actually started peeking in on his sister, because again, there's very different kinds of porn in Japan, and he's influenced by the porn over there, so he thinks this is normal. He starts peeking in on his sister showering, and his sister actually catches him watching her take a bath, and they get into this whole big argument. And apparently when they got into this argument, Tsutomu bashed his sister's head against the edge of the tub. And not only that, his mom actually made a comment to Tsutomu about how often he was like spending time with his videos, and it got to the point that Tsutomu had whooped his mama ass because she said that you should be focused more on working and not your videos. The dad apparently at that point was just checked out. He was just here to be here. He didn't really want to deal with Tsutomu like that. He was just here in passing, but not here mentally. So he just kind of was just like whatever to his outburst. They kind of chalked it up to, oh, that's just Tsutomu being Tsutomu. But yeah, with Tsutomu and his outbursts, the family kind of further like segregated themselves from him, and he just kept doing his thing. He still lived in the 2-room annex. He was still collecting his porn. He was still working at a photo newspaper company, which apparently was a family friend's photo newspaper thing. So he was just doing his own little thing apparently. So a mysterious string of events started to happen in the Saitama prefecture of Tokyo, with the first one happening in August of 1988. There was a little girl named Maria Kono. She was a 4-year-old girl, and she was last seen leaving from playing with friends. She left the friend's house at about 3 o'clock, and she didn't come home. The last thing that someone said that they saw her disappear in a Nissan Langley, which I don't even think they make no more. But they said that that's the last time that they saw her, and then at 6 o'clock, her dad, Shige Kono, they actually called the police and they reported her missing. Now, even though they reported it as missing, they were actually qualifying it as a murder. There was almost 3,000 man days investigating the disappearance of this little girl. And not only that, 50,000 missing posters were put up within the Saitama prefecture in hopes that, she would come home. Now, when officers started investigating the area, there was multiple people saying that they saw a car pull up and they saw Marie get into the car. And there was actually 2 little boys that said they saw a man who looked in his late 30s with curly hair, chubby, and he wore a summer sweater getting into a car, and then Marie getting into the car as well. Now, with Yuki, which is Marie's mother, when Yuki started making news reports, or she started talking to the news, asking for someone to come forward in regard to the disappearance of Marie, they started to receive phone calls where someone would pick up the phone and sit in silence, and if they were talking the phone, the call would hang up. This would go on back and forth for about 20 minutes. And it even got to the point that Yuki actually received a postcard that said there's devils about, or devils afoot, or devils around. It really depends on how you translate it. But she started to receive this postcard, and then the police, for whatever reason, they thought this was just like a trick or a prank or whatever the case might be. The case went cold after 4 weeks, and they kind of just did their best to move on in hopes that Marie would show up eventually. October 3rd, 1988, about 13 kilometers away from where Marie Kono lives, there was another girl, Masami Yoshizawa. Masami Yoshizawa, she was actually walking down a rural road, and a car came up next to her, and just picked her up, and then she disappeared. Now, unlike Marie, it only took 2,300 man days of like investigating and posters and police officers coming over into the Saitama prefecture to figure out what's going on. After those 2,300 days, she was declared missing, and they also left the case cold. Now, I'm not too sure what they really meant by the thousands man days. I'm pretty sure they're talking about like hours or something like that, because the timeline, it all happened within a year. They're talking about 2,300 days. That's going into the years, you know? So maybe they were talking about like hours and stuff like that. Maybe like 2,300 hours, 2,900 hours, but even that don't even make sense. So on the 12th of December in 1988, Erika Namba was the third victim that was disappearing in the Saitama prefecture. She was seen jumping into the car of a sedan and then never being seen again. Now, a day later, someone from the Youth Nature Center or the Youth Nature Base, they actually saw Erika's clothes scattered about in the woods. So they actually called the police, and they saw this was a kind of a connection. There was Marie, Masami, and now it's Erika. So with all of this, they were starting to see it as like there's like a serial killer going around in the streets doing this, you know, doing a little inappropriate things. So they conducted the search party. They looked for the little girl. They found Erika's body still tied by cords and still with tape over her face. Now, two men actually gave a report that there was a man that they helped get his car out of a ditch. And what had happened was they reported it as a Toyota Corolla when ultimately it was a sedan. So there wasn't really a report if they looked into the Toyota Corollas in the area versus the sedans, but there's a lot of speculation that that could have really helped narrow down the search by a ton. Within about a week, Shinichi Namba received a letter in the mail which basically said Erika, cold, cough, throat, rest, and death. And then after that, the case kind of went cold again. February 6, 1989, Ayako Namato received a box in the mail that has 10 teeth, skeleton bones or skeleton remains, dirt, bone fragments, a picture of shorts, a picture of underwear, a picture of sandals, and 10 baby teeth. There was also a letter in the box that said, Mari, bones, cremated, investigate. Now, there was a lot of doubt as to whether or not this was Mari's remains for whatever reason. I'm not too sure, but they actually doubted that it was Mari's remains because it was so far out from when Mari disappeared that they were basically saying it was no way that it was her. Now, the one that was going off that theory and emphasizing that that wasn't Mari's remains was Dr. Kazuo Suzuki. Now, Dr. Kazuo Suzuki, he was basically saying that wasn't Mari's teeth, but then the family was just like, can you just look into it to see if this is really her teeth? Now, with extensive, and I mean extensive, girl, dental records, dental fragments, they took the grams of the bones and compared them to her dental records, and they did find out that that was in fact Marie's teeth. Now, February 11th, same Kono family, they received another letter from a Yuko Imada. They received a letter from a Yuko Imada, which is basically like an inside joke in Japan, which is basically like now I tell. So this Yuko Imada was sending letters to the Kono family because more and more reports were going out looking for a source as to what's going on with these little girls. And I'm gonna read y'all the excerpt like right off the screen because I don't remember all of that. I put the cardboard box with Mari's remains in it in front of her home. I did everything, from the start of the Mari incident to the finish. I saw the police press conference where they said the remains were not Mari's. On camera, her mother said the report gave her new hope that Mari might still be alive. I knew then that I had to write this confession so Mari's mother would not continue to hope in vain. I say again, the remains are Mari's. So with the confession and everything, and basically this Yuko Imada basically saying that he did it, they were starting to call Yuko Imada the little girl murderer. So they classified Mari Kono's disappearance as a murder, and then they started to look into like the actual box, the actual film that had the camera, the snapshots, and they were trying to connect it to where all of this might be coming from. So they started giving out leaflets with the confessional in hope that someone would come forward. But they started to see that the snapshot lens or film or whatever, it came from like a specific Mamiya 6x7 camera. And not only did it come from a Mamiya 6x7 camera, the box that had like the snapshots, the bone fragments, the teeth, it was actually a box where, I'm not sure if you guys dabble in cameras or whatever, but I used to work in cameras. There's a type of box that carries the camera, and then there's a box that carries the lenses. Now, the box that carries the lenses, it's like very thick, very sturdy. So they saw that this box kit was specifically made to carry the lens, and there wasn't really much word about whether they looked into the photography shops or the newspaper shops in the area, but they were linking it to like someone who had access to photography stuff or photography material or dabbled in photography, period. So honestly, the Konos, they waited to actually announce that Mari's body, like Mari's remains, was in the box. And I can kind of understand why, because this is just a big shock to everybody. And I can just only imagine how they're processing it. You know, they waited and they waited to release the information. And with everything that was in the box, her hands and her feet were missing. Honestly, this tidbit had me really emotional and had me like really on edge about continuing with the case, because it really hit me so bad. And I didn't really dabble into children cases until now, but it's just like wow, you know. And I'll just read you guys the quote that her mom actually said. Her mom actually said this in a public service announcement, a news interview. She said it on the news. Hands and feet didn't seem to be with the remains. When she gets to heaven, she won't be able to walk or eat. Please return the rest of her remains. So she made this announcement at the funeral, and literally right after the funeral, they received another postcard from this Yuko Imada. And there was like a long excerpt too. I'll read it from my laptop. I hope you guys understand. Trigger warning, it does really talk about like rigor mortis and the phases that the body goes through when it dies. So if this is something that you're uncomfortable with, you're more than welcome to skip. I totally understand. Before I knew it, the child's corpse had gone rigid. I wanted to cross her hands over her breast, but they wouldn't budge. Pretty soon, the body gets red spots all over it. Big red spots, like the Hinomaru flag, or like you'd cover her whole body with red hanko seals. After a while, the body is covered with stretch marks. It was so rigid before, but now it feels like it's full of water. And it smells. How it smells. Like nothing you've ever smelled in this whole wide world. So the family was basically being terrorized with these detailed notes and boxes and letters with Mari's body and her remains and missing remains and everything else. My God. Basically at this point, just begging for whoever did this to Mari to bring her hands and feet back so her body can essentially be complete. On June 1st of 1989, there were two girls at Akishiwa Elementary School who seemed to be talking to some weird man who was trying to lure them away and take pictures of them. There were neighbors around the elementary school that saw this man and was able to run him off before he left with the girls, which was also another suspicious thing considering all these different girls are disappearing again in the Saitama prefecture. 5 days later, Ayako Namato was seen playing by herself nearby the tennis court. The last report was her getting into a car and never being seen again. Her torso was discovered 2 weeks later. The way that they were able to find out it was Ayako was the stomach contents that showed that it was her last meal, her chest size, and her blood type. They were only able to find the torso. The hands, the feet, and the head were decapitated from the body. So we're coming back to Mr. Miyazaki, old crab face ass. In July of 1989, he was actually trying to lure two other girls, two sisters actually. He was trying to lure two sisters into his car to take photos. Now, apparently what happened was Miyazaki had told the older sister to stay where she was, and he lured the 9-year-old sister. He lured the 9-year-old sister to a river. The older sister went to find their father, as she should have. She went to go find her father, and they found the 9-year-old and Miyazaki at a river. Both of them were naked, and Miyazaki actually had a photo camera in between the girl's legs, and he was taking pictures of her private parts. So the father almost tackled Miyazaki and almost beat his ass, but Miyazaki ran off and he fled like along the edge of the swamp or whatever, still butt ass naked, by the way. He fled through the swamp, and later on he tried to come back for his car, girl. He tried to come back for his car, and the police was already there, like, girl, where do you think you're going? You going to jail. So they took Miyazaki down to jail, and they were actually going to charge him with encouraging lewd acts with a minor. But when he actually got down to the prison, what he really confessed to threw everybody on a fucking loop. So he confessed to Ayako 17 days later, and then he confessed to Erika, and then he confessed to Masami. With Mari, he utilized more videotapes and recordings, and when they were actually excavating his house, they found like over 6,000 videotapes, manga, anime, and movies along with the videos with Mari included. They were able to find Mari's hands and feet stored in Miyazaki's house that seemed to be chewed up, and it looked to be burned like around the edges and stuff. So it looked like, under interpretation, he was eating the hands because he admired them. So during custody, he started to describe how he actually killed the victims, and apparently what they say is he didn't really show much emotion. He didn't really show like any regard for their lives or anything. He kind of just seemed to be in a whole nother world. I won't go into much details with the actual crimes on how he did it, but the running trend with all of the victims was he strangled them, he sexually abused their corpses, he would cut off their hands and feet so they wouldn't be identified, and he would often either masturbate or he would sexually abuse like the corpses with objects or himself. He would hurry up and do what he wanted to do with the bodies before rigor mortis set in, and he would oftentimes, like I said, cut up the hands and the feet, and he would either eat them, discard them, or he would burn them. And he would burn the hair, burn like the bloody objects. He would burn whatever they had. He would burn the clothes. He would just get rid of the evidence, or he would discard it, or he would flush it down the toilet. And he confessed to pretty much all of it. The one thing that they did say when it came to like where he was disposing the body, it was apparent that Masami and Marie were super close to each other, not only where they lived, but in the proximity of like where both of their bodies were, because apparently Miyazaki discarded Masami's body about 100 to 150 kilometers from Marie. Now, the entire case for Miyazaki lasted 7 years because, for one, they wanted to try to give him life. The lawyer that actually worked with Miyazaki, his name was Junji Suzuki, he was actually against the death penalty, so he took on the case. But before that, girl, nobody wanted this case, nobody wanted this job, nobody wanted it, because not only was it children, he killed children, he sexually abused children, he was eating bodies. Like, it's just like, girl, there's only so many battles I could fight on a weekday. So not a lot of people wanted to take the case. And not only that, but Miyazaki's dad didn't even want to get him a lawyer. You remember how Miyazaki's dad had all that money and power and influence? He didn't want none of that. July 1989 was when he was actually arrested, and it actually turned out in 1994 his dad had committed suicide. Now, when he was arrested, Miyazaki apparently wrote a very vicious letter to his dad, blaming him for everything, saying it was his fault that he turned out the way that he did. And he actually wrote like some sort of an apology letter to his mom. He basically said in the letter, like, I'm sorry I caused you so much heartache, and don't forget to change the oil in my car, otherwise you won't be able to drive it. okay? They were trying to either have him get life, or they were trying to have him be committed to a mental institution, because in Japan, apparently, when you have diminished responsibility, y'all remember diminished responsibility with Mary? They was trying to give Suzuki, they were trying to give Miyazaki diminished responsibility or limited responsibility, basically limiting his actual sense of like coherence to the crime. Now, girl, that's all fine and dandy, but honestly, he did what he did. There's that. He cut up the bodies. There's that. He was disposing the bodies. There's that. And he was recording himself with the bodies. How much responsibility did he not have for y'all to say he had limited responsibility? What's limited to you, girl? So they were trying to give him either mental institution sentencing or life imprisonment, but they were basically trying to get over from the death penalty, which, girl, he needed to fry like a whole chicken. He needed to fry like a whole chicken. Now, even though they were trying to get him like committed to a mental institution, the thing about the mental institution commitments in Japan, you can serve 12 to 13 years of that time and be eligible for release. So they were just like, there's 750 counts of evidence against Miss Girl. I don't think we're gonna put him in a mental institution. So he was getting like psychologist after psychologist trying to like evaluate him to justify him going into a mental institution. And he actually went on to say that it wasn't even him that did it, it was Ratman. He started drawing Ratman, saying that was his alter ego that made him want to do the things that he did, to kill and all of that different stuff. And it just got to a point where within those 7 years, girl, that the psychologist was like, he either has from multiple personalities at the very least to schizophrenia at the most. Either way, sis don't need to be out in the streets. He was sentenced to death on April 14th, 1997, and it was approved not only by the Tokyo High Court, but it was approved by the Supreme Court. Ain't nobody was on your side, Miyazaki. Nobody. He described the killings as an act of benevolence, and he really didn't see what was wrong with it. So they were just like, yeah, sis, you need to fry. You need to go. The Minister of Justice at the time, he signed the okay to kill him in 2008. And there's a lot of speculation that it took too long. But with him signing the death warrant in 2008, they actually scheduled his execution for that same day. And Miyazaki is reading his manga in hell at this point. So that is the story of Tsutomu Miyazaki. This was honestly one of the harder cases that I had to go through, only because it's children and it's really hard for me to imagine someone can do that to kids. Tell me what y'all think. Do you think that the Japan police system kind of has some holes that they fell through? Do you feel like they did all that they could? Do you feel like they should have tried him for limited responsibility, or they should have just went straight to the death penalty? Let me know your thoughts below. I am going to decompress because that was a very hard case. I hope y'all stay safe and have a great night. That's it for now.